Well, thank you. And having already introduced this panel, we'll go ahead and turn to you, Mr. Moss. Thank you for being here.
Great. Thank you, Chairman Flake, Ranking Member Booker, Senator Coons, other members of the subcommittee. I'd first, if you'll permit me, just like to express my gratitude to you, Senator Flake, for your public service, for your leadership in promoting bipartisan solutions, for protecting the rule of law both abroad and here at home, for standing up for American values, and for being a consistent example of dignity and integrity. The Senate will be a less august chamber without you, sir. After nearly 30 years of working on and in Zimbabwe, I hoped, like many, that the July elections would put the country on a positive path. I had the great fortune of visiting Zimbabwe with a delegation of other former U.S. diplomats prior to the election. I came away from that trip deeply pessimistic that the election and the promised reforms were anything more than a poorly disguised charade. Events since the election have unfortunately only reinforced that pessimism. We've heard plenty of rhetoric on democracy, national reconciliation, and economic reform. And while we can point to a few token gestures, very little, if any, meaningful change has occurred. First, on the election, the Electoral Commission was very far from independent. As in the past, ZANU-PF and the security forces used intimidation and violence to sway votes. The military was openly and deeply involved in the election. The ruling party even weaponized food aid for votes. Despite having months of advance warning, almost none of the evident problems in the Electoral Commission were resolved. Both the EU mission and the US mission led by IRI and NDI concluded that the election did not meet the mark. The chance for a free, fair, and credible election was unfortunately missed. Second, accountability for violence and past abuses. Mugabe may be gone, yet the government is still largely the same old actors. The government says the country should move on, yet there has been no genuine attempt to deal with past atrocities. These include the Matabeleland massacres, the violence and murders after the 2008 election, and even the recent disappearance and presumed assassination of human rights activists like Itai Zamara. Even the August 1st murder of 6 civilians in full view of the world has been whitewashed. The government even tried to blame the opposition for the violence when the TV cameras show soldiers shooting civilians in cold blood. Third, the economy. Food, fuel, and even US dollars are all in desperately short supply. The new budget has some reforms, at least on paper. But fixing Zimbabwe's economy is not about tweaking the budget deficit by a percentage point or two. It's not about employing more accounting gimmicks. Until the government deals with the dominance of the military in the economy, the ongoing rackets by predatory elites, and the flouting of basic rule of law, Zimbabwe's economy cannot be fixed. The roots of the economic crisis are political. The solutions must start with genuine political reform. And we can see the government's state of denial in their passive language. The government says people died on August 1st. No, civilians were murdered by the military in plain sight of the world. The government says we are suffering from food and fuel shortages. No, government mismanagement and profiteering elites have destroyed the markets for food and fuel. The government says that hard currency is suddenly unavailable. No, the country has no US dollars because they have been lying to the population about what's really in the bank. The shallowness of the touted reforms are embodied in the shameful treatment of Tendai Biti. I'm grateful that he's been mentioned several times already. Mr. Biti is one of Zimbabwe's most important legal scholars, a patriot, and the country's most effective finance minister ever. He testified here in this very room almost exactly a year ago, but he could not join me today because the government has taken away his passport. Since July, he has escaped at least three attempted abductions, and he was illegally repatriated from Zambia. Mr. Biti and his family face constant harass and death threats from the security forces, from mysterious groups of thugs, and from a sham court case. If the regime is this brazen against a respected opposition leader, it only hints at the persecution of wider civil society. Finally, I want to raise an issue that I'm sure will come up today, which are sanctions, which are a complete red herring. The government blames US sanctions for their economic troubles rather than grappling with their own mismanagement and corruption. There are about 70 people and about 70 entities on the US sanctions list. Zimbabwe's leaders cannot borrow not because of US sanctions, but because they have not paid their bills and are now more than $5 billion in arrears. Blaming the US is just another example of this government failing to take responsibility. In this context, the US should be extremely cautious in its re-engagement. We should exercise strategic patience. Fortunately, we have a roadmap to guide US policy. The Zadera Amendment of 2018 sets out very clear conditions for American support. These include concrete steps toward respect for the rule of law, the opposition, human rights, and getting the military out of politics. Zadera provides a roadmap to a sustainable economic recovery that does not make the US and other donors complicit in preserving the status quo. Until Zadera criteria are met, the United States should withhold support for debt relief and new loans. Instead, we should speak out about what is really happening inside the country, and we can be far more aggressive in our support for embattled civil society and human rights defenders who are, quite literally, putting their lives on the line. The least we can do is stand with them, amplify their voices, and help strengthen their resolve. They have proven worthy of our support. The government of Zimbabwe has not. Thank you.